Okay, I would like to call this meeting of the Urbana City Council to order. It's Monday, November 5th, 2018. Will the clerk please call the roll?
City Council members Ammons.
Here.
Brown. Here. Hazen.
Here.
Jacobson.
Here.
Miller.
Here.
Roberts.
Here.
Wu.
Here.
Mayor Marlin.
Here. Next up is approval of the minutes from previous meetings. October 15th, 2018, special meeting. October 15th, 2018, public hearing. October 15th, 2018, City Council meeting. Is there a motion for approval?
So moved.
I'll second.
Moved by Aaron, seconded by Jared. Are there any corrections? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. That motion passes. Are there any additions to the agenda? Okay. Next up is public input. I have several cards submitted, and it looks like people want to speak at the time of the item is on the agenda. Okay. Which we will do. Before we go on, I just wanted to take a minute to recognize a contribution that was made to the City of Urbana from Dr. Holly Rosencrans and Mr. Warren Levy. They donated $10,000 to the city for planting 80 street trees this fall. This follows a contribution they made earlier in the year with the Urbana Rotary Club, where they provided $5,000 to match a $5,000 fundraising effort by Rotary for another 80 trees or so. So basically half of all the trees that we are planting this year have been sponsored by Holly and Walter, and we sincerely appreciate this donation. It has reduced our backlog of tree planting from about 12 years down to less than 9, and that's made a significant dent in what we have to do. And it restores our urban canopy, alleviates 4,328 pounds of CO2 going into the atmosphere. It's going to absorb 12,561 gallons of water and save an additional 17 pounds of additional pollutants in our atmosphere. So a tremendous impact in many ways on our community. So sincere thanks. And I thought they were going to be here tonight, but they're not here, but we would like to extend our thanks anyway.
Yeah. That's pretty cool.
All right. We have two people who wish to address the council regarding the annexation ordinances, and that's the first item on the agenda, so we'll have you come up now to do public input. Reverend Underwood. Did you wish to address the council? Yes. Would you like to do it now?
Yes, Reverend Dr. Evelyn Underwood, Mayor.
I'm sorry, Reverend Dr. Evelyn Underwood.
Thank you, Mayor Marlin. I'm under the impression that the City Council, I'm Reverend Dr. Evelyn Underwood. Thank you, Mayor Marlin and the Council, Urbana City Council. I'm under the impression that you should have at least one email from the individuals from the area, Carver Park, and right now the historic African American Carver Park subdivision and the historic African American in Champaign Atlas Court are the two that are immediately involved. However, Dr. Ellis subdivision is the first and the only African American subdivision in Urbana, and I am from that area, and we are concerned overall of the potentiality of what is going on in our community, the takeover, as we see it, of our community coming from the south. We can see University Avenue in Urbana and Champaign. We can see Lincoln Avenue, Church Hill, and I guess even Champaign with the Bristol Place, and not from the north. As I forestated, we can see the Carver Park, the Mount Olive Church, and the Champaign area. We're being sandwiched in. And I believe that we're going to be no more. And that's what we don't want. We want to stay in our neighborhood. Yes, we had open housing some years ago. We used to not be able to move out. That's why we have the historic African American subdivisions. That's the reason. But a lot of people were able to move out after we had open housing, and that's wonderful. People should be able to live where they want to live. But we want to live in our own community. We want to live where we live. A lot of more people will come back if, in fact, we get grocery stores and other needs that we have. We have many needs that we have talked about. I think Mrs. Curry made it very evident in her presentation last time. And we love our neighborhood. We love being able to borrow a cup of sugar next door, and we don't want to move. We don't want people to take over our area. And some of the people have tried to buy some houses up the same way my dear friend did in the university area many years ago, because they want the students to take over their community. Now, we don't want they call it the luxury student housing and the upper professionals that take over our community. We are willing to share it, but not without them considering us, considering our needs, just taking over. No. We were here 5 years ago about the Lincoln Avenue and Lincoln Avenue, Church Street, Hill Street, and all that. When one of the developers who wanted to get it then, I don't think he ended up getting, said it was nothing. It was nothing but whorehouses and all of that up in there. And I was telling some of the people, he said, wait a minute, I used to live there, but I was able to move out when they had open housing. I don't want to name him. If I could name him, one person who's dead I can name was Brother Billy. Reverend Melker used to live there. So it couldn't have been whorehouses. It must have been more than that. So that's what they downgraded our people. You look at the record, you can see that it was said right at the city council meeting. We have nice neighborhoods. They're not big, fine houses, but it's what we like, what we want. And so I think it was in tonight's paper that these luxury student housing developers with residential properties that fit seamlessly within their respective community. Well, they've not tried to do anything to fit seamlessly within our community. A lot of people didn't even know that they were coming in. They canceled meetings and all of that they were supposed to have. And some other person's going to talk about the rest of it, so I think I'll just stop with that. But essentially, we want our community. We want to build up the fact that we have Crispus Attucks Court and George Washington Carver Park and Dr. Ellis subdivision. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Dr. Underwood. Jackie Curry, Carver Park, Champaign.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I don't know, did you all received a letter
Yes.
from,
The City Council, I believe, received this email. I did not receive this, but we will enter this into the record.
okay, could you please read that so it could be on record so everybody can
I can
know?
summarize it for them.
Okay.
On behalf of the residents of Carver Park subdivision, strongly urge the council to not approve the annexation. Neighborhood consists of quite a number of children who play outside. The development would impact the neighborhood with an increase in traffic. Concerned about the safety of children and grandchildren. We are certain it will change the atmosphere of the neighborhood. Primary concern would be opening of Carver and Dory Miller for access traffic. Carver Park's the first African-American subdivision to be developed in Champaign, Urbana. To those of us who own and live in Carver Park, it's a piece of our history. We beg of you to please take into account our concerns and not approve these ordinances, and we'll enter this into the record.
Thank you. Also, I'd like for the record to know that we tried to meet with Mr. Alex Sanders, who is supposed to be the local developer manager for the city or for the project. And I ended up having to contact him twice. Second call, he let me know that he was not going to be able to come to the meeting, that he would send a representative when that representative did not show. So I feel like even though we're trying to reach out and you all say that you want us to have all the know-abouts of this project, the person that could talk to us about it, that you didn't even send a representative. So I feel that was wrong. That was a waste of my time, everybody that came out, and the people that are backing us and trying to get something done about this project. It's a waste of their time too, and I just don't feel it's right, and I don't think it's fair.
Okay.
And I'm from the Carver Park subdivision, and I've been there all of my life.
Thank you, Ms. Curry. Okay, any further public input at this time? Okay, we'll move on to unfinished business, ordinance number 2018-09-058, ordinance approving an annexation agreement, which is a real estate parcel with PI number 302106326015. This is the Judy Heimberger Trust property, and this is Trinitas Development, LLC. We have representatives from the company here. Would you like to come up to the front? I assume there's no further staff report on this project. So the company representatives are here for if the council has questions. To start this off, can we get a motion to put this item on the table to discuss? On the floor, sorry, not the table. Bill?
I'll move to approve ordinance number 2018-09-058.
I will second that.
Moved by Bill, seconded by Dean. Questions for the company first, and then we'll discuss. Mary Alice.
Hello. So thank you for coming back again. One of my primary concerns that we had discussed quite a while ago was the traffic going through the Carver neighborhood. I realize that what we are approving today doesn't actually have that parcel that is adjacent to that, right? This is the stuff that's north of Champaign. That's what the piece that we're talking about today. But I did just want to emphasize, or perhaps have you guys emphasize, why exactly that entrance has to be there. I know that there was discussion about having the emergency vehicles off of Carver Drive, and that the city of Champaign had said that they wanted it open. Is that correct? That was my understanding from last week.
That's correct, but the city of Champaign is fine with it being emergency access only, so it will be.
So it will only be emergency exit, so there will not be local traffic going in and out of there?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
On Carver Drive.
On Carver Drive.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Bill and then Dennis.
On that same exit, will it be possible to maintain pedestrian and bicycle entrance and exits from there?
We can certainly make that a priority, yeah.
Without that, there's just not much connectivity for pedestrians to have to walk an extra quarter mile just to get out of the development.
Dennis?
Yeah, just to follow up on Mary Alice Wu's comment too about Carver Drive. It seemed that that was like an acceptable approach to me because it's wide and it leads right to the edge of the properties that you're trying to develop. My real problem was with 5th Street because if right off of Bradley, it's really like a small subdivision boulevard. And I don't see how that can be usefully used as a major inlet into the proposed development. Do you have a comment about that?
I really don't. The way that it's set up right now is, it's laid out the way that Champaign and Urbana and members of the emergency services, how they thought it would provide the best connectivity and emergency access. So I can't say we could change that right now. I have not had a conversation about that.
You haven't had any feedback from the neighborhood about Fifth Street in particular?
No. Mm-mm.
And then how can you assure people that Carver Drive is only going to be used for emergency vehicles if it's open? Is there going to be some kind of gate there?
Correct.
There is going to be a gate across Carver Drive,
Yeah, there's-
which only emergency vehicles will be able to use?
I don't know exactly what it'll look like, but we're going to use whatever's suggested by the fire department.
That's interesting. That's new news to me then. All right,
That's the only way it can be emergency access only.
I see.
Any other questions or comments?
Actually, I had others. but-
Oh, go ahead.
All right, so concerning the entire project, one of the things I noticed from the Trinitas letter dated September 19th was that you're going to consider adding a playground to the development,
Mhm.
which was requested by some of the council members or some of the community. And you're going to make sure that some of the buildings do not straddle the boundary line between the two things, because you replatted
Correct.
where they're going to land. And one of the things that I was very concerned about was adequate buffering from the neighborhood, Carver Park neighborhood, and also the other newer neighborhood on farther to the west. Originally, your plan was for a 10-foot buffer, but you've increased it to a 22 to 25-foot buffer with possibly additional natural landscaping. And you're going to retain the trees that already exist along the fence lines?
Correct.
All right, so that was like one of the main other concerns that I had, that the neighborhood would receive a strong enough and a wide enough buffer from their historic neighborhood to the new development that it would mitigate and limit noise and activity as seen from the historic neighborhood. So I'd appreciate your making those changes to your plan.
Sure.
Very responsive, I think, to our concerns.
Bill?
Yeah, just one more thing on the connectivity. I know the lot in between, the one that's to the east of the lot that we rezoned last time, between your property and the One North Skyon Group property. That one still belongs, I think, to the Skyon Group, and is already zoned R4. That, I mean, we already own Goodwin right away to the north of that in the B4 area that goes up to Kenyon Road. So there's a short stretch there to connect Goodwin Avenue up there, and that would be the next collector on the east side. So it seems like someday, hopefully, there will be a connection, assuming this project goes through, from your project to the east collector street to Goodwin Avenue. And we don't have a schematic of what was proposed for those two lots. We only have a schematic of what we're proposing to annex. So I don't remember if there was a logical way to do that, but I just ask you to keep in mind in your planning that eventually that would make sense to connect to the east collector, so you don't have the problem of people going through the neighborhood streets.
Okay. Aaron?
So, good evening. Thank you all for considering Champaign-Urbana for development. I'm sure we certainly need it. So I had a couple of questions for you. Is this echoing? So what sort of plans do you have, if any, in partnering with the community to address some of the concerns that you see just recently, just down the street from the development, the concerns of violence and gun violence that we've seen? Do you have any plans to partner with the two cities and what we've been doing with the Walk is One, or any of those particular things? Because you all are going to manage the property, correct?
That's correct.
And so the people who are going to be living there are going to be looking to you for your support in these types of situations. So have you given any thought to that at all?
So I know for our site, we actually have courtesy officers that actually live on the property and patrol the property throughout the day and night as far as personal security. What ideas were you speaking of as far as external
We'd
safety?
certainly be open to
Yeah.
meeting with any groups that would be important for us to meet with.
So are you all not aware of the latest concerns in relationship to, you're not?
Which concern are you speaking of?
Well, just maybe a week ago, there was a shooting right on the corner
Mhm.
of Fourth and Bradley. So you are aware
I
of
am
those
aware,
things?
yes.
So those are things that I'm speaking of externally, if you have any plans or thoughts to partner with the community to address some of those, because your residents or potential residents could be affected by that.
Okay.
Again, I think we're open to any suggestions. You would know those specific people more than me that could be leaders that could help us with that. So if you have any names or contact information you can give us, please do.
Well, I think that it's fair to ask for some support, but, this is a two-way street. These things are happening right in the midst of this conversation around this development. So I thought it would have been something that you would have been more proactive to try to
We
address.
certainly want a safe community.
When you all do these types of developments and go to different places looking for them, when you think about food deserts, how does that affect your decision? Do you see this space as a food desert?
Based on the previous meetings, we've heard that it is a food desert, but that really doesn't affect our housing or decisions with that. We know that most of the young professionals and students use, is the mic still on?
I think so.
Yeah. They use the newer grocery store further south, but as far as the actual food desert, we know that you're looking at other sites, whether it be the old water plant or any other sites to create more grocery stores in the area, but that didn't go into our decision as far as finding that particular site.
And I just thought it would be something that would be factored into any sort of development ideas for, especially from a housing standpoint. You want your residents to feel like they've moved into a place where you got a park down the street, you got a hospital close by, close proximity to the highway. Grocery stores would be important to people. I mean, some people like to walk to the grocery store or something like that. So I just thought it was something you all factored into your thought process whenever you did a development.
Yeah, it is. Well, and when we do bring the amount of people into the area, usually it's more profitable and it attracts different grocers to the area. If it's not one in the area now, a project like ours will only help it, not hurt it, and getting the grocer to the area.
That's fair enough. I think that, part of my questioning sometimes is to make sure that the public, I think we're all being better informed by some of these processes and asking particular questions. You all are coming in, as Reverend Dr. Underwood said earlier, sort of completing a sandwich from their perspective. And the other developers, to my knowledge, did not get the same type of questions that you all are getting from me at this particular point. So I do want to be fair to you and say that these are just thoughts that I'm having in relationship to the concerns that have been brought to me by my constituents, so I want to raise them. But I do think it's fair to ask these things of other developers and other people who have come around and created projects as well. So I just want to say that. So how many jobs do you all think, not the construction aspect of this, but if and when it's completed, how many jobs do you think it will produce?
Can't give you an accurate answer on that. I know for the most part we hire roughly 10 to 15 people for the actual project that we actually hire, whether it be property managers, maintenance, things of that nature. But I couldn't give you an accurate answer for total jobs created by that.
Okay, so but somewhere you think between 10 and 15?
Yes.
Okay. And when you think of, I heard you said the security may live on the premises and
Yes.
things like that. And everybody wants to live in a safe neighborhood. We all agree with that. We spoke a little bit about the residents and people who I asked once before if the people who would apply to live here, and if their backgrounds would be considered. And I think we've had some conversation with the Human Relations Commission about that. And in relationship to job opportunities, would you all be open to those same concerns in relationship to people who are seeking employment at this, at the development?
Yes, we welcome anybody and everybody to apply for the job if they feel like they're qualified for their particular position.
But you will not have a policy that automatically disqualifies people if they have a felony conviction or something like that?
I can't give you the answer to that, but we will follow every law that the city of Urbana has and the city of Champaign in regards to hiring practices.
So, and last for me, in regards to what you all have heard on numerous occasions coming from the homeowners in Carver Park, Dr. Ellis subdivision, two-part question. One, what can you say to them in relationship to their concerns about feeling squeezed or not being considered through this process? And there was a particular concern raised by Ms. Curry. Can you all speak to that about the setup for a meeting?
Yeah, so Ms. Curry, after the last meeting, I gave my card to the Reverend Doctor and somebody else, I can't think of her name right now, to set up a meeting. I think that got back to Ms. Curry. We tried to schedule meetings throughout the week. I mentioned that I wouldn't be able to make a meeting between Thursday and Saturday just because I had personal issues of last week to come up. And my colleague was out of town for vacation. And then she mentioned that the only time that she could get a group of people to meet would be Saturday at 10 a.m. Or 11 a.m. I told her I couldn't make that meeting. And they said they were going to meet without us. Before then, we have tried multiple times to have meetings with the neighborhood. We had 2 meetings at the church, right, Church of Living God right there. Contacted multiple people, met with the Housing Authority, was looking to meet with one person. Can't think of his name. He was at the meeting last time we were here. Then he canceled on us when we were en route here. So we have tried multiple times to meet with people, and the people that came out, we've made changes. Any concerns that people have had, as Mr. Roberts has spoke on, we try to make the changes, whether it be buffer zone, whether it be playground, anything that people asked for, we did our best to try to make changes with that.
I would agree. I think you all have made some accommodations to your proposal that are, I think, good faith efforts to try to address the concerns that have been made. Did you all use this project overlaps from Champaign and Urbana, right? And so, of course, you said you had the meeting at Love Corner with Bishop Gwynn. Was there an attempt to have a meeting at Mount Olive with Pastor Thomas, because that's also right behind that church as well, and it's in Urbana?
I reached out to Pilgrim Missionary Baptist Church. I'm not sure.
And Pastor Parks?
And we were not able to connect.
Okay.
But
All right.
I
Well,
did make that contact.
Thank you for answering my questions. Appreciate it.
Any other questions? Eric?
So I have tried to think about the neighborhood concerns from the perspective of the changes that I've seen in my neighborhood in the 47 years that we've lived there. And because I've tried to, I'm trying to understand concern about change. And our neighborhood has changed a lot. There's an apartment building, I'm on the corner of Busey and Main, and there's an apartment building on another corner of Busey and Main that wasn't there when we moved there. That came new. 3 blocks to the south, there's the mosque and the Islamic Center that wasn't there. We've always been 4 blocks from Canaan Baptist Church, but something new came to Canaan that's actually been wonderful. It's the Safe House for men who need transitional housing. They've come out of drug rehab, and they've been wonderful neighbors, and I hope our neighborhood has been a nurturing environment for them. So, and there was an elementary school just across Lincoln Avenue from us that is now an apartment building. All of these changes came with concerns. Our neighborhood is actually safer than it was when we moved there. But at the same time, it's a lot more diverse. Lots of students. I don't have a parking space on campus. I get on the bus at Springfield and Busey, and I'm surrounded by students, and they don't pay any attention to me. They're all on their screens. But this is a difference. They are much more diverse than students were over 40 years ago at the University of Illinois. I've tried to look at the effect on your neighborhood from having this development to the north. As well as I can tell, it'll be okay. I really believe that. I really believe that. Everybody's experience is different. Yours is different from mine, but I've tried to look at it as well as I can from your eyes, based on my experience. And I really believe it'll be good.
Further comments? Jared?
I just wanted to ask you guys a couple of questions, since I think it's already a foregone conclusion where this is going to end up tonight. So can you guys talk a little bit about what your timeline is like after this moving forward? When do you expect to complete construction? What are your residency goals as far as, like, when do you hope to get filled or meet a certain requirement, stuff like that?
We hope to open in August of 2020. We also hope to start construction in late spring 2019. Yeah.
And will you do a staged opening, or will you open parts of it, or does the whole thing got to be done before it becomes open?
We're looking at phasing, but we haven't decided exactly what that's going to look like yet.
So is August 2020 a full completion date, or is that phase one, people moving in?
It would be phase one, people
Of
moving in.
people moving in.
But it will be the majority of what's proposed.
Okay. And what about what is your guys' involvement with properties like this 5 years from now, 10 years from now?
We don't consider ourselves merchant builders. We build to hold. Again, we had a project in Savoy that we held for over 10 years. A lot of projects we do hold unless something happens and we decide to sell or somebody makes us an offer. But the reason we like Champaign is because we've been here, we know the community, and our goal is to be here for a long time.
But probably not you two specifically. You guys will probably move on to another project somewhere else in the country, and we'll be dealing with somebody else from Trinitas in the future.
Martha Dedeker has been here a number of times for these meetings, and she lives here locally. But you are correct that our specific roles within the company, we do travel.
But yeah, our property manager, we actually hired her out of Champaign. She's been here most of her life, and she's going to be the one that handles most of the day-to-day issues of the property. As far as me, I will still be on the project, a lot more hands-off than I am now, just because my expertise is not in property management. But the projects that I work on and I create, I usually stay on and see that through and make sure everything is going correctly.
How long is the longest property you guys have had that you manage? How long have you managed it for?
Well, we have a portfolio of properties in Lafayette, Indiana that we've held for 30 years that we still hold.
Are those in towns like ours? Are they similar types of
Lafayette,
construction?
Indiana is
Purdue University.
Yeah, next to Purdue University. Is probably a little smaller than, well, I guess it's similar because Champaign and Urbana kind of reminds me of West Lafayette and Lafayette. So it's about similar.
All right. Well, I hope that we have a long and good relationship with Trinitas in this development, seeing as we know where it's going tonight. And thanks for all your efforts to, do well by council's wishes and community wishes, and please stay engaged with us.
That's appreciated.
Thanks.
Aaron?
So I just wanted to, of course, Jared is correct. We know where this is headed. But I think for the community overall, the statements of that it's going to be fine, I think that if we're going to compare apples to apples, then we might have a conversation like that. But I think the issues of income inequality are real issues in our community, and it's different for a small apartment complex to be built across the street from your home than a larger development coming into your space, and what the impact will be on rents and things of that nature, and the impact of the community. And no one, to my knowledge, in all the meetings that I've been from here and community meetings, has ever spoken of any fear of diversity. So I just think that it's important to make sure that we speak to some of these things that come out from these conversations. So I, for one, am not going to be silent when I hear things like that being spoken of. So I understand where this is headed. I hope that we will have good partners whenever we have developments, and the mothers and fathers and matriarchs in this community who are here speaking tonight about what their experience has been when we couldn't live anywhere we wanted to as African Americans, are voicing their concerns, and you all are having the opportunity to hear them. And in all fairness, I don't believe that the effort to speak to them directly has been complete. I think there's more that can be done. You've had interactions with them. They've been sitting here for months talking about this conversation, and I believe if you really want to talk to them, you'll talk to them, and you'll speak to their concerns, and you'll address their concerns. You have that opportunity tonight. They're here, and you're here. So I hope that you'll take advantage of that. All right. Thank you all for all your efforts.
Thank you. Before we vote, I just wanted to reiterate the city's commitment to pursuing some basic services that are going to be needed that are needed and long overdue in this neighborhood, particularly a full-service grocery store. So that's one of my top priorities for this area, as well as some other basic services. So that's something we're going to be working on as we go forward. Will the clerk please call the roll? I will say this is a vote that requires 6 of 8, approval from 6 of the 8 corporate authorities, and the mayor votes on this one.
City Council members Ammons.
No.
Brown.
Yes.
Hazen.
Absolutely.
Jacobson.
Yes.
Miller.
No.
Roberts.
Yes.
Wu.
Yes.
Mayor Marlin.
Yes. That motion passes. Next up is ordinance number 2018-09-060, an ordinance annexing certain territory to the city of Urbana, real estate parcel with a PI number 3021-06-326-015. Is there a motion?
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
I just had a quick question for staff. Carol, I had sent email to you and John a while back asking about what we could expect in property taxes. I was asked by constituents in my ward what we could expect from this.
Yes.
And I was wondering if you could talk about that a little bit for us.
Sure. Thank you for giving me a heads up that you were going to ask the question again. Staff did an estimate of, given that there's a lot of variables still about how many people will live in the development and so forth, they prepared an estimate of between $150,000 and $200,000 a year from the Urbana portion of the Union Gardens development. So that would include all taxes and fees, including property tax, stormwater fee, sales taxes, and income tax. Those are the direct financial gains that we estimated.
Okay. Thanks.
Is there a motion to get this on the floor so we can discuss?
Yeah, I'll make that.
Moved by Dennis.
I'll second it.
And that's ordinance number 2018-09-060.
Yes. Seconded by Dean. Further discussion?
Yeah.
Dennis.
I just wanted to make a comment sort of concerning the City of Urbana's attempt to try to assist the African American neighborhoods to retain their identity. And I want to flash back to numerous attempts to rezone the properties at the corner of Lincoln and Hill Street in Urbana about 6 years ago by Howard Wakeland and his land holdings. And he was required to come back to the City Council and the Planning Commission 3 different times before he chose a zoning identity for those plots that fit the needs of the community that were adjacent to them right on the same block. And we were able to preserve the integrity of homeowners on Hill Street and their concerns during that experience. So I'm just going to say that I think that for myself, and I took a personal part in that, notifying the individuals on Hill Street at that time to come to the City Council and express their concerns, and some of the homeowners did indeed do that. So I think that our city is actually pretty responsive to the needs of the African American community. And while Carver Park neighborhood is not in the city of Urbana itself, I think that some of the most pressing concerns that I certainly had about accessibility of the emergency vehicle versus drive-through by the potential residents of the community that's being developed, and the adequate buffer between the community and the Carver Park neighborhood were answered. And that's why I support these acquisitions to the city and to the benefit of the community as a whole in raising some of the property tax values so that the entire community benefits from them, which is very necessary for the city of Urbana at this time.
Any other comments? Will the clerk please call the roll? Again, this is a vote that requires 5 of the 8 corporate authorities voting yes.
City Council members Ammons.
No.
Brown.
Yes.
Hazen.
Yes.
Jacobson.
Yes.
Miller.
No.
Roberts.
Yes.
Wu.
Yes.
Mayor Marlin.
Yes, that motion passes. Thank you very much. Next up is reports of standing committees. Committee Chair, Mr. Miller.
All right, well, guess we're going to try this omnibus thing, you guys. May the force be with me. All right, so last week, Committee of the Whole met, and we passed a number of things on to the full council with recommendations for approval. And the first 3 of those we're going to consider, if the council will have it, in omnibus fashion. Those are resolution number 2018-10-049R, resolution approving a retail electricity supply agreement for DS5 accounts. Its complementary resolution, resolution number 2018-10-05R, a resolution approving a retail electricity supply agreement for DS2 accounts. And then the comprehensive resolution number 2018-10-051R, which is a resolution approving and authorizing the extension of an electric system franchise agreement, which is authorizing the extension of an Ameren, Illinois electrical utility system agreement and all of the subsequent changes in the way they wanted to do that contract. Is there anyone that would request moving any of these 3 items to the regular agenda? And is there any public input, Diane, for those?
No.
All right. If there is no request to remove them, I will move that those 3 previously stated resolutions be considered in omnibus fashion. I need a second for this, a pass, and then we'll actually vote on all 3.
I will second that.
That's moved by Jared, seconded by Dean. Motion was made by Chair Miller, seconded by Dean. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. That was unanimous, so we will consider those in omnibus fashion.
All right. In such, for the committee, I will move passage of those 3 stated resolutions in omnibus fashion for approval.
Motion was made by Chair Miller, second.
I will do that.
Seconded by Dennis. Is there any discussion? Will the clerk please call the roll?
Council members Ammons.
Yes.
Brown.
Yes.
Hazen.
Yes.
Jacobson.
Yes.
Miller.
Yes.
Roberts.
Yes.
And Wu.
Yes.
Does the mayor vote on that?
No, because none of the three ordinances require
Great,
that the
okay,
mayor votes.
thank you.
If
Those motions, that motion passes.
All right.
Thank you, Chairman.
Well done.
Thank you, council.
The force was with you.
All right, next up from the committee was ordinance number 2018-10-070. This was an ordinance approving a right-of-way license agreement with the Urbana Park District. On behalf of the committee, I move approval of this ordinance.
Second.
Moved by Jared, second by Aaron. Any discussion? Will the clerk please call the roll?
Council members Ammons.
Yes.
Brown.
Yes.
Hazen.
Yes.
Jacobson.
Yes.
Miller.
Yes.
Roberts.
Yes.
And Wu.
Yes.
That motion passes.
All right, next up from the committee is ordinance number 2018-10-071. This is an ordinance amending Schedule J of Section 23-172 of the Urbana Local Traffic Code, establishing curb loading zones on certain streets. This was in regards to 801 East Florida Avenue. On behalf of the committee, I move approval.
Second.
Moved by Jared, seconded by Mary Alice. Any discussion? Mary Alice.
I just wanted to thank Craig for adding in the language about reviewing this after 5 years, and for the owner of the property to agreeing to that. So thank you.
Will the clerk please call the roll?
Council members Ammons.
Yes.
Brown.
Yes.
Hazen.
Yes.
Jacobson.
Yes.
Miller.
Yes.
Roberts. And
Yes.
Wu.
Yes.
That motion passes.
And lastly, from the committee, we have ordinance number 2018-10-072. This is an ordinance repealing Urbana City Code Section 15-68, which was a repeal of the aggressive solicitation ordinance. And on behalf of the committee, I move approval.
Second.
Moved by Jared, seconded by Aaron. Any discussion? Will the clerk please call the roll?
Council members Ammons.
Yes.
Brown.
Yes.
Hazen.
Yes.
Jacobson.
Yes.
Miller.
Yes.
Roberts.
Yes.
And Wu.
Yes.
That motion passes. And the last is the mayoral staff appointment. We've got one more.
Sorry. Getting ahead of myself. We also recommended that Sheila Dodd be promoted to the grants manager position in community development.
I'll second.
Moved by Jared, seconded by Eric. Any discussion? That's effective November 19th. Will the clerk?
I had a quick question about that.
Yes.
So this is in our community development department, so it didn't go out to consider other people. You said appointed to this position?
This was advertised, this position was advertised. Sheila Dodd is currently the executive director of Habitat for Humanity.
Right. So she's leaving?
Yes.
Okay.
All those in favor, please say aye.
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 All those opposed, same sign. That motion passes. Thank you, Jared. Reports of special committees. Reports of officers. Carol Mitten.
I would just like to announce that we had a successful auction on November 1st of the TriStar building, which has an address of 1301 East Washington Street. And you may recall that we had a minimum bid of $5,000, and the bid that was successful was actually $18,000. That carries with it an obligation to demolish the buildings and parking lots on the site, which would have cost the city at prevailing wages $70,000. So the net gain to us is really more like $88,000 to have a site that's ready for development. And it was purchased by, or it will be purchased under contract to the adjacent property owner, who has said they would like to develop a neighborhood-friendly restaurant with some additional retail space in a small little neighborhood shopping center, and they want to add something positive for the neighborhood. So good things all around there.
Thank you to the council for your guidance on this. Any other staff reports or reports of officers? John Schneider?
There's a public meeting Thursday, November 15th, from 6 to 8 p.m. for a formal presentation of the Urbana Pedestrian Master Plan at the Urbana Civic Center, 108 East Water. And I have these flyers for anybody that wants the information to carry out with them. There's some at the back table. I'll have some here for council, too. Oh, the bike wayfinding plan, too, I'm sorry. Both of those at the same time.
Okay, thank you. Any other reports from city officers? Okay. Under new business, we have ordinance number 2018-11-073, an ordinance approving a major variance at 401 North Broadway.
If I may, just to give a little introduction before Kevin starts, as he's moving to take his place. This variance, and Kevin will give you the details, there was recommendation from the ZBA as to the disposition of the variance, and their recommendation is somewhat beyond their purview. The staff and the property owner have been in conversation trying to achieve some kind of accord on this, and we haven't achieved that yet. And really what we're looking for here, the staff recommendation is based on our existing regulations and a strong desire to ensure that safety is achieved both on the site and for pedestrians and for cars in the right-of-way. The property owner has a perfectly valid perspective as well, governed by the desire to maintain what has become a successful business and keep the site functioning largely as it is. What would be helpful tonight is, to the extent that you find that you may find that you want to adopt one position, which is a staff recommendation, or adopt the request as made by the property owner. But to the extent that there's some desire to achieve a compromise, some guidance from the council would be very useful, which then we could send the parties back. You know, when I say the parties, I mean staff and the property owner, with some indication of a direction that you would like the conversation to move in. So with that as a preface, Kevin, if you please.
Okay, thanks. Good evening. Okay, so this is a major variance to allow a parking lot configuration at 401 North Broadway that does not meet the minimum design standards of the zoning ordinance. This property is in the central business, the B4 zoning district, which doesn't require any parking. But when parking is provided, it has to meet the standards of the zoning ordinance. So the site plans that were approved by the city for the Broadway Food Hall, and I'll pull those up right now, they're in Exhibit D. So these site plans show, so here's the building up here, and then they show a row of parking along, this is the east side of the building. So you'll see there's parking here. There's no parking anywhere else shown on the plans. So this parking configuration met the requirements of the zoning ordinance. However, an additional 13 parking spaces were striped in the parking lot when the lot was striped. And those were added to this area along Broadway Avenue, right next to the sidewalk. Let's see if I can get over to what it looks like today. So that's in Exhibit G. And bear with me a second. Okay, so in Exhibit G, you'll see the parking lot as striped, and this is what the request is essentially asking to approve. So you have parking here again along the building. Then there's an additional 4 spaces that were striped on sort of the northeast part of the site in front of the building. And then you have, I believe, 9 or 10 more spaces here along the sidewalk next to Broadway Avenue. So as I said, the variance request is to essentially to allow what you see in front of you as the parking is striped today. One thing to note here is that you have 4 spaces on the northeast part of the site that are required to back out onto Broadway Avenue, which is not allowed by the zoning ordinance, so a variance would need to be granted to allow those. Over on the southern part of the site, you have many parking spaces that are functioning both as parking spaces and as an access drive to the site, which is not allowed either. So as Carol mentioned, staff is recommending a lesser variance, which would allow 2 of the spaces on the northeast part of the site here to exist for employees only and as compact spaces that would back out directly onto Broadway Avenue. You can't really fit 4 spaces in there and still have it so that a car can park there without overhanging the sidewalk, which you can't really approve something where cars are going to be overhanging the public right-of-way. The other part of the request, so that's really the only variance that would be needed, would be for those 2 spaces, because this southern part of the site can be brought into compliance with the requirements of the zoning ordinance if the property owner were to add wheel stops to those spaces and then to close the curb and driveway, which is a requirement of the City Code, Section 20-505. So as Carol pointed out in her opening remarks, the zoning board had recommended essentially to add wheel stops to these parking spaces on the south part, and then to not require the curb closure. But really, as Carol mentioned, that's beyond their purview. Variances can only be granted to regulations that are in the zoning ordinance, not in the city code. So zoning board's recommendation was to essentially grant a waiver to city code, which is not something that a variance can grant. So as this parking lot currently stands, and I guess I'll pull up some pictures of how this looks. Let's see. I think it's an F. Yeah. So really, there are safety concerns with the parking lot as is. You can see cars parking over the sidewalk, which is a safety concern. Let's see. Okay, this is a more recent photo. So you see, again, cars overhanging the sidewalk. Since there are no wheel stops there, cars can overhang the sidewalk do overhang the sidewalk with regularity. As you can see, it does get a lot of business. So there is, it really is a safety concern when you consider that there are all these cars that are either backing out across the wide sidewalk there or driving out from in between other cars. So that's one of staff's big concerns about the parking lot as is, aside from it not meeting the zoning ordinance regulations. The staff recommendation, we feel that the most prudent course of action, which again is required by City Code Section 20-505, would be to close the southern driveway, either partially or fully, and then to have, so if you partially closed it, you could have an access drive there, either one-way or two-way, but then all parking spaces that remain should have wheel stops, and then the curb should be closed in front of those, so you don't have the safety concern with people pulling up onto the wheel stops from the opposite direction. So regarding the 4 parking spaces on the north part of the building, as I mentioned, 2 of those spaces are really just too small to allow them in anyway. So again, our recommendation would be to allow 2 spaces and then to So let me pull that up again. So to allow the 2 spaces that can be made compact only and for employees only, if they're employees only, you figure that will limit the amount of in and out vehicle movements per day, since employees are probably just going to park there once for their shift. Now, staff considered many different alternatives. So completely removing the southern driveway, installing curbs and wheel stops, which again is our recommendation, or to partially remove this driveway on the southern half and again install a curb. We also considered removing or adding wheel stops to all these parking spaces and then putting something of a more temporary solution in, like some planters, some substantial planters, in the public right-of-way to sort of signal that the driveway is closed and it's not to be used. But we would really see that as a temporary solution to the problem, and ultimately, and per city code, that curb should be closed if there are going to be parking spaces along that section. And as I mentioned during my opening statements, the option to do nothing, which is what the variance is asking for, is allowable if the variance request is granted, but that option is highly undesirable because it really doesn't address the safety concerns with cars pulling in and out, cars parking over the sidewalk. The city spent millions of dollars to improve the sidewalk and the streetscape in this area to make it more pedestrian friendly back between 2012 and 2014. So it's really in our interest to make it as safe for people that are walking by on the sidewalk as possible. So I'm going to go through the variance criteria, since the variance criteria are the only things that should be considered when making a decision on whether to grant a variance or not. So council should base your decision on these criteria. And if you want to follow along with me, I'm starting on the top of page 5 in the staff memo. So the first criteria asks whether there are special circumstances or special practical difficulties in carrying out the strict application of the ordinance for the parcel that we're looking at. As I mentioned, since parking is desired, the layout has to meet the requirements of the zoning ordinance. And since parking at least for the southern half of the parking lot, can be brought into compliance with the zoning ordinance. So really there are no special circumstances in carrying out the zoning ordinance on that southern part of the property. On the northeastern part of the property, those 4 spaces, or that area with those 4 spaces, had historically been used for parking, and it could be used to accommodate a couple of compact car spaces that would require a variance to back out onto Broadway Avenue. So we feel that that is a special circumstance with respect to those couple of parking spaces up there. Criteria number 2 is that the proposed variance will not serve as a special privilege because the variance requested is necessary due to special circumstances of the parcel. As I mentioned, that area on the northeastern part has historically been used for parking, but it's not really large enough to add spaces that would meet the requirements of the zoning ordinance. So allowing a couple of spaces up there with conditions to be compact and to be employee only, we feel would not serve as a special privilege to the property owner. The remaining requests, so the request for the southern part of the site, would serve as a special privilege to the property owner. Since that area already can be used for parking, that meets the requirements of the zoning ordinance. And if more parking, if they want to maximize spaces in that area, that southern driveway can be closed, and then the parking could remain. That would meet the zoning ordinance requirements. Number 3 is that the variance request is not the result of a situation or condition having been knowingly or deliberately created by the petitioner. So as part of the building permit process, the owner submitted the site plans that you saw in Exhibit D, which city staff approved. And then on April 20th of this year, our Urbana building inspector advised one of the property owners that he should submit any alternative parking plans to staff prior to striping the parking lot to ensure that the lot would comply with the zoning ordinance. You can see that correspondence in Exhibit E. Then without submitting new plans, the owner had the parking lot striped in the configuration that you see in Exhibit G, which doesn't meet the requirements of the zoning ordinance. So really the request for the variance is a result of the property owner's actions for the southern part of the site. We feel that in the northeastern part, with those couple of spaces we're recommending, that area had historically been used for parking, so that seems reasonable that they would want to use that area for parking again, so we don't think that condition was deliberately created by the petitioner. Number 4 is that the variance will not alter the essential character of the neighborhood. The variance request really wouldn't alter the character of the neighborhood. There's plenty of other parking lots in the area, so it shouldn't affect the character of the neighborhood. Number 5 is that the variances will not cause a nuisance to the adjacent property. So allowing more spaces on the site would lessen demand for on-street parking in the area and for parking in nearby lots, which would limit nuisances caused to nearby property owners. In addition, in Exhibit I, you will see there are a couple of communications that we received, one from the owner of the, we call it the Gill Building, or the former Gill Building, on the east side of Broadway. So the owner of that building and the owners of the CU Adventures in Time and Space, who recently moved into that building, have both indicated that they do not think that the variance request would create a nuisance. And it's probably unlikely that that the request would create a nuisance for any other adjacent property owners either. And finally, the last criteria, number 6, is that the variance generally represents the minimum deviation from requirements of the zoning ordinance necessary to accommodate the request. This request is asking for a lot, so it doesn't really represent the minimum deviation that would be needed to, the minimum deviation necessary from the zoning ordinance. A lesser deviation would be to restripe all of the parking spaces so that they meet the minimum length required for parking spaces. I didn't mention it earlier, but none of the spaces are actually striped to the length that they're supposed to be striped to. That's kind of a minor issue, though. And if the southern driveway were closed or narrowed as required by city code, the entire parking area to the south could meet the requirements of the zoning ordinance. And then you only have to find a solution for these 4 spaces on the northeastern part of the site. And in that case, as we're making in our staff recommendation, if you allow 2 parking spaces in that area to be used for employee parking and compact spaces, we feel that that would represent the minimum deviation from the requirements of the zoning ordinance for this request. So the options that council has for this case is to approve the variance based on the findings in the staff memo, to approve the variance with certain terms and conditions, or to deny the variance request. As was mentioned, the zoning board recommended conditional approval, and with part of that part of those conditions were to not require the closure of the southern curb cut, and as I stated, that can't be granted via variance. So the revised recommended conditions that you'll find on page 7 of the staff memo are, number 1, that only the requests pertaining to the 2 southernmost parking spaces adjacent to the northeastern part of the building are granted. Those spaces, with the dimensions specified in Exhibit G, are allowed to back directly onto Broadway Avenue and must be signed to indicate that they are for employees only and for compact cars only. Number 2, that bollards or planters must be installed in the 2 northernmost parking spaces to prevent automobiles from parking there. So that would be these 2 that could not meet the minimum length requirements of the zoning ordinance. Condition 3, that wheel stops must be installed in all parking spaces that abut the public sidewalk, with the exception of the 2 spaces referenced in condition 1. And number 4, that the southern driveway must be removed and replaced with a new barrier curb and streetscaping to match the existing streetscape on Broadway Avenue. The driveway may be partially closed if an access drive is installed that meets the standards of the zoning ordinance and city code. One final note, and I think Carol mentioned this at the beginning, the property owner does not agree with staff's recommended conditions. That concludes my report, and I can take any questions.
Aaron?
So the compact cars only, the 4 spaces, is it possible for the 2 northernmost spots that didn't fit the criteria, could those be like motorcycle parking or something like that?
Yeah, they could be. And I think if, with the condition that they install bollards or planters or something there, you could effectively block it from automobiles being parked there, but you could still keep it for motorcycles or bikes or dockless bikes, bike share bikes.
And to be clear, what you're saying on the sidewalk, we want the little something, either the little curb pieces to keep you from going out to protect, to just keep the right-of-way open.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I just want to make sure I was clear about it. It seems like a lot. Okay, but, okay.
Jared, Dean, and Bill.
As long as we're talking about those 4 spaces, it's my understanding from reading through the materials that they have been used in this fashion previously by previous building owners. I mean, I've been here for a while. This is definitely not the first time I've seen cars parked like that in that particular case, or in this particular spot.
Yeah, historically it looked like there was parking there. Nothing was ever striped from what we could tell, but
the city just never noticed it until now?
Well, I mean, it existed for a long time, so I don't know when, when yeah, I'm not really sure. Sorry.
Okay. To your knowledge, it did not address this previously. It's never been brought up before, even though it's been used in this fashion.
Based on the age of the building, it was likely that that was constructed and used for parking long before that requirement was put into place. Subsequently, that business closed and was shuttered for years.
Right. Okay. I got more questions, but we'll move on. I just thought it was relevant to that.
Sure. Dean?
I have 2 questions. The first one is...
Can you speak into your microphone?
Sorry, I have 2 questions. The first one is, you said the owner objected to the recommendations from staff. Did they come back with a counter offer or another suggestion?
Well, I think the owner's request is the variance that's in front of you. We did try to talk about alternatives with them. I'm not sure if he's here. He could probably speak to that better.
Yeah, once we're finished with
Yeah.
questions for you, we have some public input, including the owner.
Okay.
Okay, and then my second one, and this might have been kind of covered already, we're talking about like dockless bikes versus full-size cars. Could you do like full-size cars and then maybe compact cars, or?
Where are we talking about?
Well,
They're recommending
Okay, you're already recommending compact.
These two either be closed or maybe.
Yeah. So these two closed,
You couldn't do like,
these two compact.
you couldn't do full size and compact, or normal size and compact? It's not enough room?
No.
Okay. Thank you.
Bill?
Yeah, I remember when we approved the redevelopment agreement, I actually looked back at it, and at the time, the schematic said 25 to 30 spaces in this parking lot. So I kind of wonder what staff was thinking at the time, how they were going to get 25 or 30 spaces. And when we came back with the approved plan with 8 spaces, was there some discussion of using those spaces as non-conforming, continuing non-conforming use?
I was not party to any discussions about that. I mean, when we get a site plan in, we just evaluate it based on the zoning ordinance requirements. So we looked at that, we said these spaces conform, you know, whatever it was, the 10 spaces.
I mean, I think when we get the redevelopment agreement, it's just more of a schematic. It's not a detailed drawing, so you probably haven't gone through it at that, at that level of detail. But I can I can imagine the frustration of thinking you had 25 to 30 spaces. And I remember at the time when we approved it, we thought 25 to 30 spaces probably wasn't enough for a place that's going to hold 100 or more people. But it was pointed out that there are other city parking lots in the area. There was a little bit of street parking, the city parking lot on the west side of, I guess it's lot 25, the one north of 25 O'Clock Brewery. That is a pretty close walk to the back door. The back door was supposed to be more of a entrance too, and I think he's still working on that. So I guess, I can I definitely see the frustration. So the main problem, it seems like, with the cars, it's that the cars go over the sidewalk, and that's in the zoning. That's not in the city code. Is it your car can't go over the sidewalk? Is that why we can approve this? We could approve this as a variance, the way it was brought to us.
Well, so the zoning ordinance says you can't back out. You can't have spaces that must back out onto the
But
public
really,
street.
I mean, if you go in the north entrance, the picture showed a lot of people that were pulling in straight into the driveway and parking with the back end facing the sidewalk. If you could enforce the fact that they could pull in the north entrance and park head in along the sidewalk and not go over the sidewalk when they park without using bump stop. No, that's some kind of gun
Wheel
thing,
stops.
bump stock.
Wheel
What's it called? Wheel
Wheel
stops. Without using those, then it seems like it would at least meet the objectives of the zoning ordinance.
If you could enforce that,
Okay.
maybe, but I'm not sure how you would enforce that.
Okay, thanks.
Dennis?
The suggestions by the staff don't address the variety of widths and lengths of the marked spaces. And there's about 3 different kinds of widths and lengths that you indicated. They weren't exactly regular. Does staff have a concern about those current marks? Or are you expecting a remarking of the existing and the proposed spaces that would have wheel locks, or whatever they call it?
Wheel stops.
Wheel stops. Or does it matter really that much?
That is probably the least of our concerns. Though I do suppose that it should be probably explicitly stated in a condition that the spaces could be allowed at their currently striped lengths.
And just to tack on, just to clarify why Kevin stated that's the least of our concerns, it's because there's actually enough space for the parking, but there's not quite enough paint. So I just wanted to put that on the record, that it's not that we're just saying, oh, it doesn't matter how long it is, it's that there is enough space, it's just, it's not striped to the right
Okay,
dimension.
well, that's good to know. Thank you.
Yeah.
Mary Alice.
So I look forward to hearing from the owner to find out the specifics on why they have concerns on your proposal here. I did have one clarification on the closure of the other driveway. Is it on the table that you could just keep the driveway and not have somebody park there? So another option would be that they could not have to close that curb, that they could just not use it as a parking space.
Yeah, they could do that, and I think I may have skipped over that as an alternative. On page 4, up at the top, number 4, that was something we considered. So you could remove all the parking spaces that are sort of in the way of the driveway, and then...
And how many spots would they lose if they did that?
It looks like 6.
They would lose 6 spots for
Yeah.
that driveway? And can they partially, like, I know that there was this conversation about partially, like, close it and have, split the difference, but I think that's what you said in terms of it's not within the purview of the zoning board. Is that correct?
Well, I mean, if there were, so there could be a partial closure, but all the spaces would have to be removed from in front of the driveway, like, however
Big that driveway ends up being.
Yeah. So there can't be spaces just right in front
So
of that
there's
driveway.
6 right now, and if they closed it so they could maintain 4 but have 2 cars, they would lose 2 parking spaces. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I think, and I'll pull up the exhibit that Craig put together. And I apologize because I realized too late that in your packet, somehow when I transferred this into it, the schematic came out incorrect. So the curb was actually moved. So Craig went out and measured it, did some, and drew up this schematic. So essentially it would be, if you wanted to do a partial closure, you put in the new curb, and then you could leave a driveway for two lanes in and out. But it looked like no matter what, you would lose 3 spaces in this configuration. It didn't look like there was really any way to lose any fewer than 3 spaces.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay, Eric.
Might you gain something, I'm trying to do geometry in my head and I can't do it, but might one gain something by angling the spaces and having one of the driveways the entrance and the other one the exit? Would that improve the utilization of space? And I think it would improve the traffic flow.
That might be an option. That's something we considered very early on. I can't remember why we didn't consider it more thoroughly. But I don't know that it's our job to do all the necessary engineering work on somebody's site plan.
Right.
So
I really appreciate it when spaces are angled. I think that these spaces that are at right angles to the traffic flow are they're annoying at best, and at worst, I think they contribute to fender benders.
Okay, I think we should hear from, Bill.
Just a quick question. If it was closed completely, I know there's some street parking in the block south, like in front of the Timponi building. Would it be possible to put in 2 or 3 spaces there?
I imagine so, but I know that since the railroad's right there, I'm not sure if there are some distance requirements from that.
Okay.
But there might be.
Thanks.
Okay, we have 4 members of the public, 3 of whom do not wish to speak, but they wanted to state that they approve the variance as the lot is currently striped. That's Shai Mouth, Richard Grossi, and is it Shara Shah, all have this position. They're in support of the variance and the lot is currently striped. And then the owner, Matt Cho, would like to speak.
Good evening. You all know me as Matt Cho. I've been a small business owner in downtown Urbana for a while. You may have been to my cafe, Cafeteria and Company, or heard of CoLab, a co-working space that has brought over 50 entities since opening in 2013. Sipyard is another business that I own, a beer garden and graffiti gallery. I've been told that it's probably the most unique and creative spaces this area has ever seen. I didn't pay anyone to say that. And now my latest venture, Broadway Food Hall, which opened January this year, is a 10,000 square foot food court serving hundreds of working professionals throughout the afternoon and families in the evening. And locating a business in downtown Urbana, let alone multiple businesses, is no easy feat. There are many challenges, and why I'm here before you today is because of parking. While I'm happy that several of my businesses have customers that choose to walk or bike, parking is always in demand and it's never close enough. When we opened Broadway Food Hall, we anticipated providing parking, but we were unable to stripe our lot due to the extended winter. Almost every day there was a comment about when we were going to stripe our lot. Believe me, by the beginning of May, when we were finally ready to stripe, I had observed nearly every single configuration possible. And what you see striped today is the most well-designed solution that my partners and I, along with a parking lot contractor of over 30 years, decided upon. I firmly believe that the lot as is currently striped does not pose a safety risk to pedestrians or traffic. In fact, when we did not have the lot striped, there were several cases where cars would get blocked in. I believe the mayor, you were blocked in at one point. And at least two minor accidents.
I was not happy about that.
And at least 2 minor accidents that we heard of. Since striping the lot, there have been none, 0. In addition, as I continue to observe, cars rarely back out into the right-of-way as they so claim. Instead, they naturally use the driveway as it's intended for. This is unlike 2 other properties in downtown that I believe either have a variance or a special permit where cars are only backing out into the right-of-way. Why is this lot treated any differently? There's also this idea of closing off the driveway using a wheel stop or curb cut. I understand the wheel stop is problematic, but a curb cut is not only a cost that any business can afford, we cannot afford it, but I also believe this is a mistake. By increasing the congestion inside an already congested lot, you ultimately increase the risk to pedestrians and any traffic inside that lot. I love the Courier Cafe, but has anyone backed out on a Sunday afternoon? Keeping the current striping is what my partners and I are requesting a variance for, and I understand that council can add or subtract conditions. And after meeting with city staff, I believe there was a win-win solution that we presented. In fact, I think Kevin even presented it, is by putting wheel stops where the curb currently is, where the fire hydrant, those 3 spaces, while also blocking out those 2 to the north for motorcycle or bike parking. But if the only solution is to rebuild the curb, then unfortunately, as a business less than 1 year old, we have no other choice than basically removing the spaces in question. And by doing that, I'm certain that, you know, this would cripple the business that we've worked 8 months to create. So that is kind of my spiel, but I do have some things to address. I think we did meet. There was maybe no kind of, I guess, solution from the meeting, but that was what staff requested that I present to city since they were, I guess, unable to present that case to you. Also, the 25 spaces that we mentioned in the redevelopment agreement, we were relying on our existing non-conforming use to maintain those, and merely by striping them after observing 4 months of winter parking in that kind of haphazard fashion, we thought that this would provide at least some order, and in fact it has. So with no accidents that we know of, it's actually been a success.
Any questions for Matt? Mary Alice?
So you're in agreement with having those 2 northern spots turned into kind of motorcycle, bicycle parking for those 2?
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the negotiation, is that we know that we could probably argue that these are existing non-conforming uses, right? They've been using them as spaces forever, but you know, like having stuff dangle off the right-of-way, okay, we can take those 2 off the and use those for bicycle parking.
And then the other solution that you were talking about, I'm just wondering if you can restate that, because it's not in the paperwork here, right? And I'm assuming, and perhaps this is a question for staff, that we only can look at the paperwork that's in front of us. And so No? Okay. Well, why don't you restate it for me then?
Well, that's the thing, is when we discussed maybe about a week ago about what possible solutions there was kind of this idea that, yes, we could basically put wheel stops in front of that curb. There's about 3 spaces. There's a fire hydrant where the curb is existing, but then keeping the driveway as is, allowing cars to back in and out, and then also, I guess, closing off the 2 northernmost spaces into motorcycle, bicycle parking, but not to the extent of planters or bollards. I think that's something new that I just heard today.
Okay, but then if you kept the driveway as is, then you would allow people to park there as well as use it as a driveway. Is that the proposal?
Right.
Okay.
If not, then yes, we would most likely just have to remove the 6 spaces because there's no way that we would be able to, I guess, incur the cost of a curb cut at this point.
Aaron?
So in a situation, I don't know if this is who would answer this question, but so in the case where the vehicle is over the parking space and into the right-of-way, and a pedestrian, a biker, or someone is injured by that vehicle, is that your responsibility or the city's responsibility?
I believe, I don't know, I defer to a lawyer, but we have insurance, so if we are sued, then we are prepared to.
I'm just trying to get an understanding from a legal standpoint, who's liable in that situation?
If we are aware of an existing condition that is unsafe and we take no action to remediate that condition, we very likely could be held liable. If we're unaware of the condition, that's something else. We are not unaware of the condition as the discussions have played out and the maps or the schematics have shown. Now, the owner also, for providing that kind of a situation, could be held liable, and then it becomes a battle between the owner and the city. That's not to say that the owner, with proper insurance, couldn't indemnify the city, but we very likely would be sued.
Bill?
So sometimes when we have right-of-way agreements with businesses, they take legal responsibility for anything that happens on that right-of-way while they're using it. If we made an arrangement with the owner to take the legal responsibility for any potential liability the city would have as a result of not having wheel stops, would that satisfy the legal requirements?
It depends on what you mean satisfy. What most people don't understand is an indemnity is only as good as the person giving the financial ability of the person giving the indemnity. In this case, I believe it's a limited liability company that owns the food hall. If the food hall does not have significant assets, we would be sued. Normally, with an indemnity situation, we would be sued. We would tender the defense of the suit to the the owner. And if they have the wherewithal to cover a judgment, they would cover a judgment. We will be sued. Injured people don't care about indemnity agreements. So if they have $1 million worth of insurance and they indemnify us for $1 million, the likelihood of an injury, unless somebody's seriously injured, like rolled over, maybe they would cover it. Again, we'd have to make sure that their insurance company would accept the indemnity arrangement. Some do, some don't.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions for Mr. Cho? Eric?
So I'm just trying to get my head around this. The northern parking, it sounds as though this is not a point of major contention, because since it has been brought to our attention that the overhang of cars in those northern 2 spaces would partially block the sidewalk, then the city would be liable for any injury that would be associated with that. So we really have to, I think we don't have a choice but to deny that, and you've already indicated that you would. Now, the other, I'm trying to understand what the point of contention is here. Is the only other substantial point of contention the length of the stripes in the parking spaces? Or what else do we have to
It's
consider?
the 6 spots that exit onto a right-of-way. Wheel stops are not sufficient enough to, I guess, prevent someone from rolling over it, that you need to close the curb completely, is what I've been explained, and that's where, as a business, that we just can't do that. We can't build a curb.
Wow.
We would just take out the spaces.
I
But I would just need some direction from
I
the
think
city.
Lori needs to clarify that.
Yeah, please.
I do, excuse me, I do think it's the curb closure that is the main disagreement between the parties because of the expense. So if, excuse me, our standpoint is a space, excuse me, pavement cannot be both a parking space and a drive aisle into a parking lot, so you kind of need to choose. So if you choose that it's a parking space, other city code requires that you need to close that curb cut. Or you can choose that it's a driveway, and therefore it stays open.
So the city's position, and maybe this is a legal position or a position based on experience, is that wheel stops are not adequate to prevent people from driving over them?
Well, the concern, I believe, and Craig Schunkweiler is here to speak to that if necessary, but the concern is that the wheel stops will stop you in the parking lot from going over the sidewalk, but if you do not realize the wheel stops are there and you're pulling in from the street, that could be a major safety problem for you in your car.
Nice. Okay.
Craig, do you want to clarify any of that?
Thanks, Matt.
Yes, I will confirm what Lori said there. Wheel stops themselves, they're just like a bump, basically. It's not going to prevent anybody from, especially if the parking lot is nearly empty at the time, somebody could come through. There could be a low light situation, could even be a full light situation. And it's not going to prevent people necessarily from driving through that space. So I would agree with Lori, though, it's an either-or situation, safety-wise.
Dennis.
I guess I'm waiting for a discussion.
Well, we need a motion on the floor for discussion. The motion, and as I understand it, the motion that is being considered is what you'll find on page 3 of 5 in the ordinance section of your packet. So it lays out basically 4 conditions, which includes the staff recommendation for removing the driveway, but that's at least a beginning point for consideration. So can we get a motion on the floor, and then we'll have discussion?
Yeah, okay, I'll make a motion that we approve the staff's recommendations as they stand in the ordinance for this project.
And
which
that's
is-
ordinance number 2018-11-073.
Right, thank you.
And is there a second?
I'll second.
Oh, was that Dean? Seconded by Dean. Okay, discussion. Dennis.
Yeah, I would say that I would support just having the wheel stops along the walkway to define where the parking is separated from the right-of-way, the people's walkway. The removal of the creation of the additional curb and decorative landscaping, thanks, yeah, for, which is apparent on the rest of the street. I don't think it would be necessary to do that, but I think it's a winning situation to allow the full eastern side parking as marked, as long as there is no access from the street to those parking spots. It would be a closed parking area, but there's plenty of room for cars to come in and exit and turn around and get in and out of their parking spots, to allow it to become a normal parking lot. The north thing with the 4 spots, 2 of them being compact cars and 2 becoming made into a bike or motorcycle parking seems totally appropriate, and that's not a question. But to close off the driveway with bollards or with wheel stops seems to be an adequate solution to me. I don't think we would necessarily need to require that a full closure and landscaping be done. And it wouldn't harm any of the parking that's available currently for the business.
Any other discussion? Bill?
Yeah, I mean, I think it actually works pretty well because people don't want to back out on Broadway Avenue. But it does seem like if you, it'd be much better if they only exited forward, but I could also see it working the way it's been working, where they basically park there and then exit forward going around and out to the north. So I understand Dennis saying is that we wouldn't require the closure, but that sounds like that would be against the city code. So I don't think that's really an option, is to not have the stops without closing the curb. I also agree with Craig that having the stops and leaving the driveway open would be hazardous. I think even with you get an inch of snow and you can't really see the stops very well, it blends in, and I could see people coming in and hitting those, or even parking there head in and forgetting that they're there and trying to go out, and then you put too much on the accelerator because you think you're stuck and you end up flying out into traffic or something like that. So I would if you're looking for direction, I guess I'm kind of open to leaving it the way it is, in a way, if it could somehow be enforced that the cars don't hang over the sidewalk, or if we get enough indemnification to cover it. I do think that there's a lot of worse situations, and even the two spots that we're allowing because of the pre-existing use is worse because they're forced to back out. There's no other option. I think if people have the option not to back out onto a street, they'll take it. But when you're parked against a road or against a building, like the city building we have in front of the library at Green and Cedar, is it? It's a city-owned building that's been there for a long time, and I guess we allow that because it's been like that for a long time. But when you have to back out into the road in order to go, then that's a bad situation. So I think those 6 spaces, it's not ideal. I think it was probably a creative way to stripe things, and not surprised that Matt would think of it. But it is trying to get 25 to 30 spaces in there. It probably is the least problematic way to do it.
Any other comments? Jared?
I'd agree with Bill. I think probably the least hazardous solution is to leave it functioning the way that it has been. I've driven in and out of that lot probably 50 plus times because I frequent Broadway Food Hall quite a bit, and I've never run into an issue being there. And it was the Wild West before they striped it, trying to park in that place. That was crazy. But everybody just parks in the things, and I personally, as a driver, I don't even come in where those 2 spots are on the very south part where that driveway is, because it just makes more sense to go through the other way and come around and pull through. And then you get to do as you said, Bill, and then you're parking facing the sidewalk, and if you just pull straight out, I mean, you're looking right at if there was anybody there. I also don't find that I've struggled with foot traffic coming in and out of there very often. Most of the people who are traveling near or by there on foot usually cross actually north of there because they're coming to and from that major bus stop that's outside of, what is that grocery store? Save-A-Lot. and they're also walking up and down that side of the street. But I almost never see people walking on that sidewalk in front of Broadway, except for people like me who were walking to Broadway. And then you cut in right at the end. So, I mean, that's just my personal experience from it. I haven't seen the issue, and Matt and them did propose. I'm sure you guys saw all those pictures of all the other places. We all know that there's a lot of tight spots in Urbana, and this isn't the only place where somebody would be backing out over a sidewalk that's considered a pedestrian sidewalk in the city. Lots of other places where that happens. So I don't know why we would be so particularly concerned about this one. I do think that the two northernmost spots are probably hazardous with the cars hanging out already onto the sidewalk. That really doesn't give you a lot of time to react if there was someone behind your vehicle, but you'd probably see them walking up when you were getting in or out of your car. So I can see it, but I don't think that the solution is going to be having to curb or put the barriers there, because the barriers don't make sense in winter, and the curb is just going to be, I mean, it's just going to be a lot for him to do it, and I haven't seen an issue there. So my thoughts.
Further comments? Mary Alice.
So I was taking the curb stops to mean that the cars couldn't park on the sidewalk. So if you're facing the sidewalk and you take that parking spot, you can't accidentally just kind of park on the sidewalk. That was kind of my understanding of the purpose of those wheel stops. And certainly, I appreciate, Bill, that you brought up the fact that when people plow, we end up with piles of snow everywhere, and it's going to be even more difficult to figure out where in the heck that sidewalk starts. So I can see utility in having wheel stops on the sidewalk so that people don't accidentally go over the sidewalk. I would love to hear if there are some creative solutions in terms of this curb. It sounded to me like the owner was not adverse to doing something that would allow him to have the actual parking spaces that he needed there, but he just didn't want to incur the the expense to have the curb there. So that is what I'd like to send back and saying, if there is a way that we can do something creative here, I don't have a good answer for you. That ideally, that's what I would like to see. I would like to see the curb stops that go and abut the sidewalk. I'd like to see those two northern spots closed off, and the two other ones be compact cars for the employees. I think if we can just solve that one piece, I think the whole thing wraps up.
Legal, and then Dennis.
Unfortunately, the Zoning Board of Appeals kind of muddled a little bit of this issue. And you're assuming that the zoning board, and indeed yourselves, have the authority to override an existing ordinance separate from the zoning ordinance. Obviously, the Zoning Board of Appeals has the authority to grant variances from the zoning ordinance. But our right-of-way ordinance, section 20-505, requires the closing of curb cuts. So to further expand on Alderperson Brown's question about indemnity, what you would be doing if you allowed that, allowed one of the, just as Alderperson Wu indicated, just installing curb cuts and hope that somebody doesn't, whether it's in the winter over snow or whatever, pull in from Broadway across the sidewalk until they hit the wheel stop. What you would be doing is ignoring, knowingly and intentionally, ignoring an existing ordinance regarding the controlling of closing off curb cuts. So that creates a heightened sense of liability. Now, there probably are some creative solutions. Wheel stops or some kind of a small pony wall on the property owner's property at the edge of the sidewalk, where it is visible from the street as somebody maybe starts to turn, that they may see that, or some decorative bollards with chains or something like that, but that doesn't necessarily fit in with the streetscape that's already there. I mean, those are all policy decisions. But without rewriting the ordinance, 20-505, I don't believe you can override that.
Dennis?
Yeah, so, I mean, your suggestion, and it kind of also puts into my mind picturing a 2.5-foot-high planter, rectangular planter that would be lined up, maybe like 5 of them in a row, that would create not just a wheel stop, but a barrier, but it would still be decorative, and it wouldn't take up more than like 1.5 feet of any real space that you would have. I mean, that if it was on his property, that would be one way of doing it. It would be a visual block to do so. My other thought was, perhaps I'm losing it, actually, having done that digression, but concerning the, okay, maybe I just don't remember it right now. I'll have to come back to
Well,
it.
it sounds like there's consensus, I'm hearing consensus that the two northernmost spaces are, you're fine with reserving those for motorcycles or bicycles. The two adjacent to that would be for compact cars reserved for employees only. Is that, are we all good with that? All right, there's
Right.
consensus there. The question is how to deal with the other rest of the space. I think at this point, I would recommend you send this, keep this in, or send this to committee and work this out, because it doesn't sound like we're going to get anything done tonight. Dennis?
Yeah, you know, the other part that I remember now is that, usually, yes, when there's like street improvements, the city requires undue accesses to the street, parking lot, or driveways to be closed. Where does the money come from to do that? When we're doing a streetscape, does the city pay for it out of a motor vehicle fund?
I believe we just had a case on Main Street where the owner just closed, I believe, 3 driveways? 1 driveway. They had 3 driveways. They were required to pay for the closure of the driveway, not the city.
Because it was after the streetscaping, or, in other words, the streetscaping had already been funded and it was a done deal, and therefore additions to that come to the requirements of the owners, you know.
That's correct. It was part of a redevelopment of that site. So
Mhm.
that typically triggers site costs, including those immediately adjacent to the site, to be borne by the developer.
I got you.
Mary Alice?
I'm just curious, how much does it cost to close this?
Do you have a ballpark, Craig?
I ran some rough numbers, and I've got about a ballpark number, about 15,000.
If the city did it, or if the owner did it?
It would be contracted work.
So we'd
where-
be paying prevailing wage?
Yeah, yeah.
Eric?
So I fully agree with keeping it in committee, but I just want to toss out another idea, which is I wonder if would be the possibility of some sort of decorative barrier where the curb would be, but much less expensive than creating a curb. So for example, I guess what I have in my mind is some kind of fencing. You'd have metal uprights and chains between the uprights that would delineate the outer edge of the sidewalk, and would keep cars from turning in to that space. And then there would be the wheel stops at the other side of the sidewalk. So I guess I'll just ask a question. As an alternative to actual curbing, would some sort of less expensive barrier like that meet the criteria of our ordinances?
I believe there's a section in Section 20, could be 510 or 506, but it talks about specifically restoring the streetscape to, what's the terminology you think, Craig? To the standards that are required. I mean, it talks about restoring the streetscape and putting in a curb. It's pretty specific that it's supposed to look like what it's next to.
But that's in our ordinance.
Correct.
Okay, so it is in our ability, if we believe that it's safe, it's within our ability to broaden the options within that ordinance.
Just keep in mind, though, whatever you do, even if it's on the private property side, you're creating an unused portion of the entrance. So from the public works standpoint, we would say that that entrance that's unused that's within the city right-of-way would need to be removed. So no matter what you do on the private property side, like say a fence or anything like that, you still have this unused portion of the entrance on the right-of-way side. That right-of-way side would need to be removed.
Well, okay, now, are you saying that is a requirement of the ordinance, or are you saying that's a requirement of safety?
Well, it serves two purposes, right? I mean, one would be the ordinance or the city code, but the other one is safety.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, anything that, you don't want people to drive off and think that they have an access point into, and then
Yeah.
boom, there's no way that they can do that. There's two things that can happen. We're not just talking about on private property, but we're talking about the re-entry onto the public road.
Sure.
Me as a professional engineer, that's probably the primary thing that hasn't been brought up here, is that re-entry into the public road. That is for, I will just tell you that that's a concern to me.
So I would just like to suggest that just as a practical matter, that in our thinking about this between now and the next time we see it, that some possible less expensive ways of blocking the entrance at those points, delineating it in a way that's visible from the road so that nobody inadvertently turns into it, that something other than restoring the curb, possibly less expensive, that those be considered in the mix, and if there's a judgment that those are safe, then but they're not allowed by our ordinance, then maybe we ought to consider broadening the ordinance to permit those.
Any more direction for staff? Jared?
I don't have any more direction, but I will make a motion.
Okay.
I'm going to move that we send this to the next committee of the whole meeting to further consider. We'll let staff and everybody have some more time to think about it.
I'll second that.
Moved
May
by
I make a
Jared.
statement?
Yes.
The next
What,
committee...
Can we vote on that, please?
Of course.
Okay, sorry.
Well, my concern is the timing, as the next committee meeting is Monday, and memos for that need to be written today. So I'm just worried about having time, just logistically.
Not-
We might need some time to chat.
The following committee after the next.
Yeah, 3 weeks from today.
3 weeks from tonight.
The first reasonable committee of the whole meeting.
Yes.
How's that? All right. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All right. That will go to committee. We made some progress, and we'll figure it out before the next meeting. Next up is ordinance number 2018-11-074, an ordinance amending the Urbana zoning map, rezoning 9 real estate parcels at North Ray Street and West University Avenue from B3 to B4. This is the James W. Birch III Trust, plan case 2353M18. Marcus Ricci will present.
Thank you, Mayor and City Council. There are 2 adjacent rezonings in this area, the 9 parcels and the 1 parcel to the southwest of it. I would like to present those together,
Sure.
if that's possible.
Sure, and that's ordinance number 2018-11-075, which is an ordinance amending Urbana zoning map, rezoning 406 North Lake Street from B3 to B4.
That is
Plan
correct.
case 2355M, same case, 18.
Thank you. So Exhibit A shows the parcels subject to the requests by Sarah Birch, trustee for the James Birch Trust, and also Bridget Logue, to be rezoned from B3 General Business to B4 Central Business Zoning District. So these 9 parcels, this is turned so that left is north. These 9 parcels are owned by the Birch Trust, and then this parcel is owned by Bridget Logue. University Avenue is on the left, and Race Street is on the top. This change to B4 Central Business Zoning District would reflect the future land use designation of central business attributed to these parcels in the 2005 comprehensive plan. Because of their similarities, I'll be presenting these together. However, the cases may be voted on individually. On Thursday, October 18th, the Urbana Plan Commission voted 6-0 to recommend to City Council to approve both of these requests to rezone all 10 parcels to B4 Central Business. City Council approval is required for these two requests. Exhibits B and some pictures I will show you show that the 9 Birch properties are all currently vacant. Those are these here to the northeast, and some may have been last used as far back as 1973. 7 were used commercially, 2 for single-family residential. The Logue property at 406 North Lake Street is currently used as single-family residential. So here's the land use map, and we've got single-family residential. The rest are listed as commercial. This one is also listed as single-family residential, and then the Logue property is single-family residential. Some Google screen captures from the site show that the property is currently vacant to the northeast corner, and you can possibly see the house of 406 North Lake here on the west end of the property. Some photographs looking west from Race Street. You can see the house in question at 406 North Lake, the vacant parcels here. There are 2 ingress-egress easements across the street front properties on Race Street to allow the houses that are on landlocked, technically, to have access to their properties. And this is from the corner of Race and University looking southwest towards Leal Park. This is looking south across University Avenue. Leal Park is on the right-hand side, one of our lovely dock share bikes. And then also the house at 406 North Lake Street. Exhibit C shows that all properties are currently zoned B3 General Business. This is the zoning that it's had since '79, when the previous 2-district commercial zoning classification system was split into 4. Before 1979, they were also zoned business. Exhibit D and Table 2 detail the future land use designations of the subject property and area. You'll note that these subject properties are the northwest corner boundary of the area designated for future central business use. So this would be filling out that area with B4 zoned properties. The proposed rezoning would expand the easterly adjacent B4 Central Business District further west and bring the subject properties zoning into conformity with their future land use designation as per the comprehensive plan. It would also provide a more appropriate zoning classification for an area that the 2012 Downtown Urbana Plan included as part of downtown. From a development standpoint, the proposed B4 zoning designation requires a reduced minimum lot size, bringing the 4 currently legally non-conforming lots into compliance with the zoning ordinance, and eliminates minimum parking requirements and required yard setbacks. In the B3 district, there's 137 uses that are allowed. 114 of those are permitted. In the B4 proposed zoning district, only 129 uses are allowed and only 100 are permitted. So it's actually a more restrictive zoning classification. Moving on to the LaSalle criteria. In the case of LaSalle v. the County of Cook, the Illinois Supreme Court developed a list of factors that are paramount in evaluating the legal validity of a zoning classification for a particular property. In addition to those criteria, the court later developed 2 more factors in the case of Sinclair versus the Village of Richton Park. All 8 factors are discussed starting on page 3 to compare the current zoning to the proposed zoning. In order to maximize the defensibility of your decision, City Council's decision must be based only on an objective application of these 8 criteria. LaSalle factor number 1 regarding the existing land uses and zoning of the nearby property, the proposed rezoning to B4 central business is compatible with the zoning and land uses of the immediate area. Therefore, the expansion of the adjacent B4 district should weigh in favor of the applicant's requests for rezoning. LaSalle factor number 2 regarding the extent to which property values are diminished by the restrictions of the ordinance. The proposed rezoning to B4 should not reduce the property values of neighboring properties. The primary differences between the B3 and B4 zoning districts are the reduced number of allowed uses and the reduction of several lot characteristics, such as required yard setbacks, floor-to-air ratio, etc. Increasing the flexibility of the subject properties for future use should not reduce the property values of the surrounding properties and should weigh in favor of the applicant's requests for rezoning. LaSalle factor number 3 regarding the extent to which the ordinance promotes the health, safety, morals, or general welfare of the public. The proposed rezoning to B4 will not affect those criteria in any foreseeable way. There is no discernible difference between the current B3 zoning and the proposed B4 zoning in this regard and should weigh either neutrally or in favor of the applicant's requests for rezoning. LaSalle factor number 4 regarding the relative gain to the public as compared to the hardship imposed on the individual property owner. The public would likely experience limited gains in continued vacancy of the subject properties, while the property owners would continue to experience significant hardship from the reduced flexibility in lot usage that is created by the long-time B3 zoning. The relative gain to the public and the elimination of hardship to the individual owners created by the proposed rezonings should weigh in favor of the applicant's requests for rezoning. LaSalle factor number 5 regarding the suitability of the subject property for the zoned purposes. The subject properties are well suited for central business type uses. Given the existing B4 zoning adjacent to the east and nearby to the south, the proposed B4 zoning district is logical and reflects the central business future land use designation shown in the comprehensive plan and should weigh in favor of the applicant's requests for rezoning. LaSalle factor number 6 regarding the length of time the property has been vacant as zoned. 6 of the 10 vacant properties have been vacant an average of 15 years and 1 has been vacant over 30 years. As such, rezoning would likely encourage the vast majority of the subject properties to be put to use rather than continue to sit vacant and should weigh in favor of the applicant's requests for rezoning. Sinclair factor number 1 regarding the community's need for more of the proposed use. Future uses will likely be based on market research to confirm the need for any proposed use, and the absence of that current needs research should weigh neutrally on the applicant's requests for rezoning. Finally, Sinclair factor number 2 regarding the care with which the community has planned its land use development. When the city adopted its 2005 comprehensive plan, this area was generally envisioned as part of the central business future land use designation, and the proposed rezoning would meet the following goals of the comprehensive plan and should weigh in favor of the applicant's requests for rezoning. Goal 15, encouraging compact, contiguous, and sustainable growth patterns. Goal 18, promoting infill development. Goal 28, developing a diversified and broad, stable tax base. And Goal 34, encouraging development in areas where adequate infrastructure already exists. The city received a letter from Tim Bartlett, the director of the Urbana Park District, which expressed concerns regarding the proposed rezoning. And at the Plan Commission meeting, the 2 public comments received at the Plan Commission's public hearing were mixed, 1 in support and 1 opposed. Discussion focused on the different uses allowed and development regulations in the current and proposed zoning districts, possible improvements to area walkability, possible impacts on the proposed Kickapoo Rail Trail extension, the need for redevelopment in this area, possible traffic impacts, and the potential need for a traffic impact analysis. The draft minutes from that meeting are attached. The staff findings are summarized in the memo. I will highlight the last 2, which are that the proposed zoning map amendments are consistent with the 2005 Urbana Comprehensive Plan, and the proposed zoning map amendments generally meet the LaSalle and Sinclair criteria. The City Council has the following options in these two cases. Approve the ordinance as presented, approve the ordinance as modified by specific suggested changes, or deny the ordinances. At its October 18th, 2018 meeting, the Plan Commission voted 6 ayes to 0 nays to forward both cases to the City Council with recommendations to approve both requests. And staff likewise recommends approval for both ordinances. That is the end of the staff report, and I'm happy to answer questions. I will say that Paul Tapman and David Crow are here, and John Kaiser are here, available to speak on the Birch rezoning, and Ms. Logue and other members of the development team are here to speak on the Logue application.
Dennis.
Yes, thanks very much. I'm not opposed to the rezoning request, but I'm thinking about historic precedents that have occurred when the city invested quite a bit of money to take down some buildings and structures that had been on some of the lots that were being cleared to benefit Mr. Birch. Maybe this was like 7 years ago or so. And the city invested quite a lot of money in making those clearances available. And some people were concerned about the clear cutting of all the vegetation on the lots. And it was said, well, we're doing this for the purpose of potential redevelopment, none of which occurred over the years. However, Michael Bronk, our arborist, was able to negotiate the preservance of a very large red oak tree, which is an offspring, I guess, of the large oak trees that are in Little Park, which has been a park for quite a long time, ever since it was changed into a park, having once been an Indian burial ground and then later a pioneer burial ground. So my concern is, will this rezoning in any way affect the agreement that we have with the Birch family to preserve this tree in any proposed development plan? And will there be a need to do any kind of archaeological survey of the property before development is allowed? Because we don't know whether there are Indian burials extending all the way to Race Street, perhaps. So those are my questions.
Okay. To the first question, I did, and I will also defer to the other staff members that are here. As I read the development agreement, the tree needs to not be cut until a building permit is pulled for that property. So
potentially we could lose that tree.
Yes.
Unless we could work with the developer to perhaps include it in a parking area.
That might be a good, viable negotiation discussion, yes. But
not a subject of the rezoning discussion, as we cannot place conditions on a rezoning.
Yes, I realize that, but that could be something we could address in the future, perhaps. Okay.
Right. As I understand it, there is not a redevelopment agreement being proposed for this.
Right.
So I think the rezoning request stands on its merits. The tree stays until the building permit is pulled for it, is, I understand, the extent of the the development agreement. As to the second question, as I researched the cemetery, all of the research I found talked about it being within the boundaries of Leo Park. So I'm not a historical or an archaeological expert, but from that research, that would lead me to believe that the most likely place to find remains might be in Leo Park. That's not to say that there couldn't be something in this area, but I'll also say this area was fully developed up until 2017, when the last house came down, and it had been occupied for 40, 50, 60 years. It's possible that there is remains or other archaeological, bits in between in side yards that weren't excavated. I don't know what the requirements are, though, for a private developer not using federal or state funds to go through archaeological, surveys.
Okay, right, thanks.
Any more questions? Bill?
Yeah, I watched part of the Plan Commission, it was Plan Commission meeting, and one of the questions the developer, or one of the reasons the developer said for requesting this was for more flexibility in parking, and he mentioned the setbacks. There are no setbacks, I guess, in before, and there's no parking requirements, but they want to provide parking.
Correct.
But with B3, you can park a certain distance into your front yard, right? You can, is it 10 feet?
You can encroach into a front yard setback if you provide additional landscape screening.
So instead of 15 feet front yard, it would be 5 feet with some screening.
In the B3,
Yeah.
I believe so.
Okay.
I think one of the other mitigating factors is that there was recent IDOT right-of-way dedication for the safety improvements going on along University Avenue, so that reduced the developable area of the lot. So that was one of the other reasons that they chose to pursue the B4 to reduce those yard setback requirements.
Okay, and with B4 with no parking requirement, most of the downtown area, I think, is B4.
Correct.
And I assume we did that, or they did that, somebody did that years ago, because we provide a lot of city parking lots and street parking, and we don't
Yes.
want parking in front of buildings where it makes it less walkable and things like that.
Correct.
I don't know if we have a real high amount of parking in that particular area, though. Just, I guess, to the south of the tracks, there's a lot that we talked about earlier. Is that something that we should consider, is whether the current or potential city parking is enough to support it before rezoning in that area?
I don't believe so. We did have our 2018 downtown parking study, which was a 10-year update of the 2008, and I can't speak to the individual block surplus and deficit levels, but we do still have over 1,500 surplus parking spaces throughout downtown. I can't say right now what it looks like in that area, but the deficit blocks were near the Lincoln Square area.
Okay. And I think on the Pioneer Cemetery, I think they moved a lot of the pioneer graves. I don't know how many of the Indian remain graves they were able to remove, but when they built the park, I think they removed quite a bit of those, and I don't know where they moved them. Maybe Dennis knows.
Yeah, I do. It doesn't matter.
Mary Alice?
So I pulled out my handy dandy map here, and I was trying to figure out, right now you have a couple of properties that will be single family, that will remain single family, that are not part of this. Right?
Correct.
There's about 3 of them, I think. And I can't find anything on the existing zoning map that has B4 abutted against R2. Is there a concern? I mean, really, one of the big reasons that this is being requested is because of no minimum setbacks. So theoretically, somebody could build a building on the property line, right, which would directly abut those residential houses. Now, I realize that they're not zoned R2 right now, but they are
Correct.
existing land use.
Yes.
Right.
So any incompatible land uses would have to still follow the zoning ordinance's requirement for buffer yards and landscape yards. We have not, researched what that is, and typically wouldn't until a use was proposed for it.
So it would have to still adhere to the fact that there's non-conforming land use just to the south, is that what you're saying? So they wouldn't be able to put a building right on the property line, even if it was zoned before?
I believe in this case it's between uses and, between districts and not uses. So let me look, unless Lori's already found it. Okay.
Well, the landscaping buffer table wouldn't apply, Marcus. But while you're looking at that, I'll address maybe a question that you didn't quite ask, but might be in there a little bit. So when something is zoned commercial and it has, in particular B3, and it has a single-family house on it, that single-family house is not legally non-conforming. I mean, it's legally non-conforming, but the idea is that use will not continue forevermore. So it was zoned for a use that it doesn't want to see there in the future. So,
Are you saying that basically the because I'm talking about two kind of sets of houses. There's there's a house on the property that's being requested to be rezoned to B4.
Right.
And I'm assuming that the future, that house would not exist there, right? But there are lots just south of all the ones that we're talking about that says SFR right there that are not part of these lots. And those would continue unless, right, to be single-family residences.
right, but the rezoning doesn't change what the landscaping buffer would be. So, yes, it would change the setback, but for instance, there is no landscape buffer requirement between what it is today, meaning zoned B3, and that house, because it's zoned, that house is zoned B3.
So the buffers are required between dissimilar zoning districts, not uses. So because those houses are in a B3 zoning district, they don't get afforded the protection of the buffer requirements.
So regardless if it gets rezoned to B4, B3, they still have the same scenario?
Correct. Yeah, so if
Okay.
they decided to do whatever use they wanted to do now, they would not be required to put in a landscaping buffer due to incompatible land uses. They might have to for some other reason, like if there was a parking lot there and the parking lot screening requirements kicked in.
But they couldn't build on the property line.
So you're correct in that that is the difference, but there's
The
not an
difference is they
extra-
cannot build on the property. B4, they can build on it. B3, they cannot.
So I will say there are multiple codes involved. The zoning ordinance does not have any yard setbacks requirement, but there are still building code requirements. So, fire separation distances between buildings and properties. And I can't speak to those because that's not my department, but it isn't just the zoning ordinance that keeps people safe.
And parking, so if they do put in parking, even if it is zoned before, it does, as you learned earlier, need to meet the zoning ordinance for parking, and that includes parking screening. So any parking, certainly there would be a screening requirement, if that helps.
All right.
But that would be the same in either the B3 or B4.
Yeah, I just hesitate to put a building on a property line right next to a single family. I mean, I wouldn't want to look outside my house and see a big building right there. I mean, it's built by right? If we zone it as B3 or B4, you'd still have a setback, a little bit of a setback from your property.
So
You'd still, I mean,
the in the B3 zoning district, it's a 15-foot front yard, which would not be applied in the
Right.
area that you're talking about. A 5-foot side yard setback and a 10-foot rear yard setback, those being brought down to 0.
so it's the 5-foot that I'm worried about.
Right.
Because that's the side
And
yard.
so in this case,
Okay. All right, so it's not
these
15.
are both front yards.
Right.
And this would be considered the rear yard because it's the shorter of the two other sides, and this would be considered the side yard.
So it's 10 feet.
Right.
Okay. All right. And just kind of,
This would be actually,
'Cause
this
it's
would
the
be
back.
10 feet here.
Right.
And this would be 5.
so I just, two other things, and then I'll be quiet. The first one is that parking, in my opinion, is an issue in this area. Anybody who enjoys Silver Creek brunch, which I love, that place is just packed, completely packed, that surface parking, gravel parking right over there. I'm not saying that, I just want people to keep that in mind if they're thinking about building something big there. I think it would be awesome to have new building construction there, but we do have to, other people should keep in mind that it's not easy to park a lot of people there.
Right.
And number two, I'm just going to say this, I always know that we have problems with the amount of money we can spend, but we definitely need a new comprehensive plan because these things come up every single council meeting.
We agree. Bill?
So this is in the new TIF district, is that right?
I cannot speak to that.
Okay, I think it is, and I assume if there was going to be any major development there, it would come to some kind of development agreement. So some of the things like setbacks, assuming those houses were going to stay as part of the development, we could probably also have some input on at that stage if we did a development agreement, and potentially, I suppose, even require more parking or as part of our incentive or something, help pay for more parking or a deck or something like that there. So I guess that's part of discussion. That wasn't really a question.
Any other questions or discussion? Are you ready to vote?
Mayor?
Yes.
Seeing as how these two things are related and presented together in the same fashion as the Ameren stuff was the last time we met, I'd like to consider voting on both of these ordinances in omnibus fashion.
Well, you really won't get any time because you have to take 2 votes anyway.
Oh,
So you need 3 or more items. But thank you for trying. That was a good try.
well, in that case, then I'll just make a motion that we approve ordinance number 2018-11-074, an ordinance amending the Urbana zoning map, rezoning 9 real estate parcels at North Ray Street and West University Avenue from B3 to B4 as recommended by the city.
Moved by Jared, seconded by Dean. Further discussion. Dennis?
So do the owners have a future plan for this property? Is this just a speculative request for rezoning, or is there something that they're thinking of?
We do have the developers and owners in the audience if you'd like to speak. Paul Tapman? Welcome back.
As he said, my name's Paul Tapman. I've been a developer here for a few years, a couple of years, 20, 30.
More than that, I think.
Actually, I've been here all but 4 of my 79 years. So, anyway, we don't have a contract with a client. We have an agreement to put together the project if we can come in with the proper zoning, which is tonight, and the proper budget numbers. We do, yes.
So you actually do have a project in mind, and
Project in
this would
mind.
help facilitate the growth of that project.
The parking, all that stuff is not a problem. Another reason we wanted this is we need about 61 parking spots, so we'll be more than adequately covered with parking.
Well, it's nice to see. I'll just comment. It's nice to see some action taken on this empty lot area here.
Yeah, Jim put that together several years ago, and he made the agreement about 7 years ago with the city, but unfortunately died 5 years ago.
Mhm.
He left it to his daughter, and her career's north. So we've been trying to find something to fit in there for some time, and we've finally got a good prospect. We're down to numbers now. If we get through this tonight, then we put the numbers, and hopefully we're there. So,
Thanks, then.
and it'll be very beneficial to the city, tax-wise, retail tax-wise, everything. So, okay.
Thank you, Paul. We have a motion and a second. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Councilmembers Ammons. Brown?
Yes.
Hazen?
Yes.
Jacobson?
Yes.
Miller?
Yes.
Roberts?
Yes.
Wu?
Yes.
That motion passes. Next ordinance, number 2018-11-075.
I'd like to make a motion that we send this ordinance, or we just approve the ordinance.
I'll second.
Motion to approve. Motion to approve, Charlie.
Motion made by Jared Miller to approve ordinance number 2018-11-075, seconded by Dennis. Any further discussion? Will the clerk please call the roll?
Councilmembers Brown?
Yes.
Hazen?
Yes.
Jacobson?
Yes.
Miller?
Yes.
Roberts?
Yes.
And Wu.
Yes.
That motion passes. Thank you very much. Last items on the agenda are appointments of our interim Public Works Director, Carol Mitten, and interim co-city engineers, Brad Bennett and Craig Schonkweiler, and they will serve during the period in which we're doing a search for our new Public Works Director. Is there a motion for approval?
I'll move approval.
Moved by Jared, seconded by Dean. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. That motion passes. With no further business before the council, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.